Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's live stream presentation. We are live on Keith Harris's YouTube channel, which is just starting out. So please hit the subscribe button. We're live on my YouTube, my Facebook, and even, I throw everybody a curveball, we're on LinkedIn tonight for the heck of it. So good evening, one and all. So good to be back on here doing Historians Off the Clock. Keith and I talked about we need to do one of these together again. And who are we going to bring on? And so we asked mentor and friend Gary Gallagher to be here, and he has an hour of time to spend with us, and it's so great to be reunited with both of you. How you doing, guys?
It's just great. I'm delighted to be here tonight with you two guys. This will be fun.
Yeah. And
yeah,
Keith,
I'm looking forward to it, man. Yeah, all is well. Thanks, John, Gary. It's good to see you. Looking forward to what we come up with here.
Yeah, and as everyone knows who's watched Historians Off the Clock previously, this is like us talking shop over a drink of our choice. And tonight, everyone's got their throat lozenges because it's that time of year. We have water available. We have ginger ale. We're just living the high life tonight, apparently. Keith, I think we want to start off by asking Gary the question that you asked him right before we went live, because I think this is going to lead us down a really interesting direction.
Okay, yeah, I think so too, Gary. We were talking about your emeritus status. How are you enjoying retirement? I guess is the word we use.
Well, I'm enjoying it very. It's hard to believe I retired in 2018, and I still stay very busy, but I don't have to go to departmental meetings anymore or put up with obnoxious colleagues or listen to people who think they're the smartest person on whatever side of the Mississippi I'm on. I like that part. The thing that I miss the most is actually walking into a classroom and teaching. Keith, you were subjected to a good deal of my teaching once upon a time. I love teaching, although I think I'm not sure my style of teaching would still work as well as it did for 35 years.
So, Gary, let me ask you something. You were talking about, being in the classroom these days, and I mean, let's get right into it. Been reading a lot of stuff on college campuses, what's going on in academia, with the way people are teaching, what people have to endure. I guess is a good way of putting it in a college classroom. What are your thoughts on the student body, how they're reacting to teaching, the kind of things that we're dealing with on college campuses these days?
Well, I'll just be very frank about this. I think history is full of hard edges. History is not just all fun. If you're going to be serious about history and engaging with history, you're going to put up with a lot of things that aren't very pleasant. And students don't want to hear things that aren't pleasant now. So I'm told by many friends who are still teaching, they feel triggered by certain things, and because it makes them feel uncomfortable. Well, if you don't want to feel uncomfortable, don't study history. That would be my advice, because you cannot possibly engage honestly and realistically with history without feeling uncomfortable. Americans now, in my view, want a kind of cartoon version of the past. First, they want it in 30-second sound bites. They want to know who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, who should I like, who should I hate. I just want to make sure I understand that, and then I'll have a good sense of history. And of course, that's a certain recipe for not understanding history at all. They don't even want to hear about people who might have been engaged in things that make them uncomfortable. But that to me is a recipe for not really understanding anything about history, not anything.
Let me ask you, do you think that that's a fault of the students who are demanding something and as paying customers at these universities, paying these enormous yearly tuitions, are they demanding this and then getting that from the institutions, or is it something that comes from above institutionally, where they're crafting the narrative? Because listen, in my high school classrooms, it's on my syllabus. Exactly what you just said is that history is not pretty. There's going to be some things that make you uncomfortable, and if you can't sit with discomfort, then this isn't the class for you. And I do this in the 9th grade all the way through the 12th grade. And when I send my kids off to college, I tell them that, you should embrace the discomfort and understanding that, these are things that are going to upset you, and so be it. If you're going to study history and really learn about it, there are all kinds of horrible things. There's wonderful things that have happened in history too, but there's horrible things that have happened, and you're
And
going to have to deal with them.
sometimes from
So
the
what?
same people, Keith, sometimes the horrible things and the wonderful things come from the very same people, because people are
That's true.
complicated and they're not
But my
cartoons.
question then is, they're not. They're complex. But my question, of course, is, where does this come from? Does this come from the institutional level, or does this come from the students demanding it?
I blame everything on my generation. I think baby boomers are responsible for more bad things than any other generation in history. We have empowered successive generations who have reached a point where they've been told so many times that nothing should ever make them feel bad. They should always feel comfortable. You should never feel uncomfortable. And if you are, you should go complain to some deanlet or sub provost about how you don't feel comfortable. Life makes people uncomfortable. I think it's coming from the students, but they are supported by administrators who are craven in too many ways and don't want to upset students. And I think it's a very toxic cycle that is in place now that is absolutely inimical to actually learning anything. You're supposed to feel uncomfortable in college. The idea that you shouldn't feel uncomfortable in college is so mind-boggling to me. College should challenge you. It should make you uncomfortable. You should happen to listen. You have to listen and counter other points of view, not just suppress them. I mean, it's if you don't ever want to feel discomfort, then college shouldn't be the place where that could happen. But I think in too many instances, that's exactly the place where it can happen now. And it has a chilling effect. I have many former colleagues who they parse everything they say now. They're very careful about, am I going to use a word? Am I going to use an example that's going to upset someone? I don't see how you can even teach if that's the main thing that you're worried about. I really don't. I think that is, I'll say it again, absolutely inimical to what education should be.
Do you feel that this is a trend that may be swinging, as the pendulum swings far out to one direction, could it possibly be swinging back in? Because, I mean, you read in the news, you hear about free speech issues and various other things, all the way to the highest levels. The Ivy Leagues are, really dealing a lot with this kind of thing now. Do you feel that there is pressure put on universities to embrace what liberal arts education is supposed to be in the first place, and that's to challenge the way we think about things? Or do you think that it's continuing on a train wreck trajectory?
That pressure, I think it's continuing on headed right for the cliff. But I think the pressure to throttle back on this is coming from outside the universities. I think the overwhelming majority of the people who are actually in control in the universities are fully on board with it. And the fact that in the hiring process, they can filter out anyone who isn't on board with it makes it very difficult to find voices to counter the main narrative. A word that they love, the narrative. History is just a narrative. What's the narrative? Anyway, no, I'm not. I'm actually not that optimistic, Keith. I'm not. I was asked, I'll give a couple of personal examples. I was asked to give a lecture at a major university about leadership lessons from the Civil War, civil military relations. And my original proposal was that I would talk about Lincoln and Jefferson Davis and their relationships with some of their senior military commanders. They thought that was a great, let's do that. And then shortly before I was actually to give the talk, they said they really thought it may be a better idea if I only talked about Lincoln and his relationships, because it might upset some people in the audience to hear me talk about slaveholders. And so could I just please talk about Lincoln and his, and I can do anything you want me to do. Of course I can give a lecture so that's what I did. I gave a lecture on Lincoln and his relationship with key commanders. But the point there is, they were afraid that there were people in the audience who couldn't even hear someone talk about slaveholders because it would just be too hurtful to hear them talk about slaveholders when you're talking about the 19th century, for God's sake. I mean, I see that as a very troubling sign. I was going to give two. I'll just give one.
I'm under the considering the what you just described. I'm surprised they wanted you to talk about Lincoln too. These days, even Abraham Lincoln's on the chopping block for making things like
I mean,
disparaging comments about Native Americans, talking about some of the things that he said prior to his presidency about Black people
the really hurtful thing is, of course, that Lincoln was a man of the 19th century, for God's sake. Nobody in the 19th century checks all of our boxes in 2024. If that's what you're looking for, you can't look at anybody in history. Nobody in history. I mean, Cornell's been in the news lately about having the same problems that Harvard and Penn and other places have had. Man, they'd had a statue of Lincoln, a bust of Lincoln, I guess, in their library or someplace for a long time, and they took it down for a while and then put it back. But I mean, they took U.S. Grant statue down in San Francisco. It started with Confederate argument. As you discover people in the 19th century, you figure out that they say things that do not pass our litmus test, and so take them all down. Let's just pretend nothing ever happened. Because we're so wonderful. I mean, we won't look wonderful in 30 years. We'll look as benighted as I mean, it's so ahistorical and counterproductive, I think. I really do. And it's such, I'll leave it at that. It's counterproductive and ahistorical.
Keith, what have you found with your students at that level in your particular classroom?
Well, I mean, with my students, this is, you're giving my speech, Gary. This is precisely what I do with my students. I tell them exactly the same thing, and I tell them that something that I remember from your classes back when I was at UVA, that if you expect anybody in the 19th century to pass our standards, then you're going to be disappointed every single time. That's just the way it is. And I tell my students that, the things that you hear some people say that you may admire might upset you, and that's just how it is. And if you really want to learn the history, you have to learn all of the history, not just the stuff that makes you comfortable. I had my students read John C. Calhoun, and I was talking about that on TikTok of all places, and somebody just let me have it. They ripped me a new one because I told children about John C. Calhoun. Talked about his pro-slavery arguments, and
what a monster.
and talked about his statesmanship. A person who I consider to be one of the most important statesmen of the 19th century, and his ideas about state rights and various other things, and they flipped out about that too. And I said, how could you possibly understand the events that lead to the Civil War without understanding John C. Calhoun's definition of government and what government is supposed to do? You can't. And so if we write him out of the history because he's upsetting to us, then we're not going to get it. We're going to have a very one-dimensional understanding of history, and my students learn that from day one in the 9th grade. When we start talking about these kinds of things, and my 12th graders, when they graduate, I tell them to go and give the professors hell, and I hope they do, pushing them on some of the things that they say, and they all go off to the finest institutions in the country, and I hope that they bring what they've learned in my classrooms into their discussion seminars in college.
I think that would be wonderful if they did. I think that there's a perception among students in universities, good universities now, that if they stray from the accepted line, there could possibly be punishments for them, and that they self-censor. It doesn't mean everybody does, but I think many students do. They know they're smart. They know what everybody wants to hear. They know what they're supposed to say. They can say what they're supposed to say. And if they actually believe things that are at odds with that, they just don't say them, and they rock along, and they get out. I still speak to lots and lots of groups, and I especially deal with lots of middle school and high school teachers each year, and give week-long seminars for them on the Civil War. And I have had untold teachers and also students from other classes I've taught since I retired come up after I've spoken and say that the environment that I set up is the first time they've been in an environment where they felt that they could say anything and it wouldn't matter. They could actually say what they thought, and there would be no potential downside to it. And to me, that's the absolute highest compliment I could possibly get as a teacher, is someone, they said, even if you disagree with me completely, I feel like I can say it, and and we can discuss it, and we can debate it, and we can argue about it, but there's not going to put a little mark next to my name that this is a problematical person. And so I think it's the fact that so many people have come up and told me that, I think is indicative of the degree to which this has become a problem. And in some of the teachers' instances, it's clearly administrators telling them what they can do and what they can't do, what they can talk about, even telling them books that they can't talk about and so forth. I think it's a serious problem. And I think perceptions of universities have changed over the last few years in the United States. I think and which is very sad to me, very sad to me. And there's Kevin Levan right there with a comment.
Yeah.
I've had that
hey,
comment.
Kevin, what's going on?
Times, Kevin, untold times. And I've dealt with probably, I would guess, 2,500 teachers over the last 15 years in these kinds of things that I do. I love doing them. And that is a leitmotif through every one of them that I do, that they feel liberated to be in an environment where they can really say anything that they think. And they're not going to be punished or mocked or made to feel, discomfort in some way.
I've actually told my seminar students, because I talk about them doesn't mean I defend them. And I think sometimes that's lost on some people when you talk about someone from the past, like Keith with John C. Calhoun. Doesn't mean he's defending them. He's just acknowledging the fact that this person existed and had an impact on what this narrative that we're talking about with the Civil War or antebellum experiences are. You can't just ignore it and say, we don't want to talk about that. That's not help. That's not education in that way.
Late in my career at UVA, the last 4 years that I was at UVA, I taught a graduate course that I called Foundational Texts of the 19th Century. I didn't teach it when you were a graduate student, Keith, but I did later. And I merely had people read things that I would hear graduate students prattle about, but it was clear they'd never read them. And so we read all the foundational documents: Declaration, Articles of Confederation, Constitution, the Hartford Convention resolutions. But we read Calhoun, we read Tocqueville, all of Tocqueville, we read Olmsted. But one of the things I assigned was Huckleberry Finn. And there was a sort of meltdown the third year that I taught it by people who didn't think that we should that they could even discuss Huckleberry Finn because of the language that Mark Twain used. And I said, do you have any idea what the real animating idea, what this is really saying about race relations? What do you really know about Huckleberry Finn? Well, they didn't know anything, but they knew it had the word, and they didn't think that we should be discussing that book. In a graduate course in history, that to me was a kind of watershed moment. I just found that, deeply distressing.
I think it goes back to attention spans as well. Attention spans have gone drastically down. Like you said, Gary, earlier, people want things in 10-second sound bites. They want things quick. They want it now. And you can't do that with history. You can't give a 10-second sound bite and say, okay, we covered that. Now let's move on to the next thing. It's just wild. But Keith, you're sitting in front of a large bookcase. What are you reading now? We're reading Barron's Longstreet's book, which I need to get across the border somehow. What are you reading now, my friend?
You want me to smuggle you one in, John? I know some people.
It costs.
I have connections.
Someone just
Does it cost a lot of money to get a book?
Someone just sent me a book from, I believe it was North Carolina, and it cost them $34 to send me a book.
To mail it?
To mail it. So I'm like, it costs less for me to drive to you in some cases.
Wow.
Than it is for you to send it. But yeah, it's and that book looks hefty. So that might
this
be
one. Yeah, I just grabbed that one is, and I only like reading hefty books these days. Anything 350 pages plus, I'll gravitate towards that every time. But we talked about Barron's book on Longstreet, which I think is just fantastic. I also just finished George Rabel's new book, Conflict of Command, about the sort of interesting and complicated relationship between Lincoln and George B. McClellan, which I quite like this book as well. And I also, it's a little bit more forgiving of McClellan, I think, than I'm comfortable with. I used to really go after McClellan a lot, and it seems the more I read about McClellan, and Gary, you've got a look on your face. I know you're going to say something. The more I read about McClellan, the more I'm somewhat sympathetic to what he was dealing with, and I think he was a great organizer. I think he had the slows, like Lincoln said too. I have problems with that, but I'm a little bit more sympathetic to Lincoln. He was a twit in every conceivable understanding of the word. But I'm becoming a little bit more sympathetic.
And a complete narcissist. I mean, Keith, how can you can't possibly read more than about 20 pages of his letters without throwing the book down and closing your eyes and imagining you're in an academic departmental meeting. You already know.
There it is.
First thought,
I have him right here.
What about me? What about me? Does everybody know how wonderful I am? Sometimes I'm afraid they don't know how wonderful. I just read George's book. I finished George's book as well. And everything George writes is good. He's such a smart historian and has written on such a diverse group of topics. But he's gentler on McClellan. I've been thinking about McClellan lately because I was revisiting him in the summer of 1862, and I just can't. I'm going the opposite direction you are, Keith. And I started, as you will know, I find McClellan, he's such a smart guy, but he's hard for me to take in very large doses. His letters to his wife.
Once again, I've been called upon to save the Union.
Yeah.
But not only that, he's even worse than that.
Yeah.
I hope John Pope fails so I can save the Union. I want the United States Army to be defeated so I can save the Union. I mean, for God's sake, he's just he's very problematical for me.
I'm just trying to cut the guy a little bit of slack. I mean, you
cut him some slack. I recently read Ron White's new biography of Joshua Chamberlain as well, which is another big. It's the first big book on Chamberlain since Alice Trulock's book in the early 90s. And it's for people who've never read anything about Chamberlain. It'll be a good, I think, first place for them to go. And there's a lot going on.
Yeah, definitely. I'm starting to see some of since I'm now in Canada, I'm starting to see some of the Canadian books on the American Civil War as well. There was a great one came out last year called The North Star, and it talks about some of the Confederate underground in Montreal and some locations of that occurrence. And I'm right in the heart of the ending of the Underground Railroad area. So Harry Tubman actually spent time in this town, 10 years in this town. So it's really interesting growing up near Gettysburg and now being here and seeing it from a truly international perspective and seeing how big this thing actually was. A lot of people just think it's centered like we think the Eastern Theater is the best theater. Obviously, Gary and I think this. Keith, I don't know. Are you an Eastern Theater guy or you Western Theater?
I'm an Eastern Theater guy. Okay. Even though all my ancestors fought in the Western Theater, I'm an Eastern Theater guy.
Yeah, and I'm a Western too. But Keith and I have both we've been able to overcome those elements of our history and personalities and realize what was going on. A lot of former Confederates ended up Jubal Early ended up in Drummondville. He lived there for 4 years after the war. A bunch of them came in and out of Canada at the end of the war.
Yeah, there's a huge history of that up here, and there are some American Civil War aficionados, if you will, people who are really interested in it. But it is really something that kind of floats under the radar because it's a lot of War of 1812 and hearing, we defeated you 3 times as an American and getting that, kind of poking the bear here. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing to see it from that other perspective. And to know the next time I go to Montreal, I have a few other spots that I need to really.
I'd love to go to Montreal. Beautiful. Go to Montreal and go to Quebec and see the Plains of Abraham. And my grandmother was a French Canadian My maternal grandmother, I didn't learn until after she died that her first language was French.
Wow.
So there I have kind of Canadian roots in that regard as well, although she was born in Oxnard, Keith.
Oxnard. Wow. She was born in, okay.
Wow.
That's
Actually,
that's
this
close by.
is more than anybody wants. She was born in Paris, California, Perris, which is in the Inland Empire. Then they moved to Oxnard, in a wagon. She heard Teddy Roosevelt give a speech in a train in Oxnard when he was on his California trip. She was a little girl and heard him give a talk.
Wow.
Well, when I was a kid, we used to go to Oxnard to see punk rock shows when I was, so that was.
Of course you did.
They used to call it 60 miles north. This is not LA. Come see the punk rock shows in Oxnard, and it was Nardcore. So it was a really great. They were really good. Growing up as a teenager in Santa Barbara, which is where I kind of grew up, it was a great place in the 80s to be a teenager because you get in just enough trouble to not get in really serious trouble.
Not real trouble.
And then from time to no, not real trouble, but mischievous teenager trouble. And from time to time, we would tell our parents we were doing one thing, when really we were going to Oxnard to see punk rock shows. And that was
not surprising. That's not surprising at all.
That was always a good laugh.
Kevin's here wanting to give a shout out for new books on the OR. I've not heard of this.
Yale's been working on that for a long time.
Wow.
It's great to have that out.
That sounds really interesting. That I can imagine you at the punk rock shows, Keith. That's just the way you roll.
I'll pitch another book now that is going to be out. It's coming out from LSU. There probably already books around now. It's Cecily Zander's book on the Army in the from the late antebellum years through the post-war years, the political infighting relating to the regular army and the profound antipathy among Republicans to a significant regular army. She breaks a lot of new ground in this book. Be out from LSU. I think the first week of next month it's actually due out, but should be Cecily Zander's book. We'll keep an eye out for that. It's really well done.
Yes, I am in touch with Cecily, and I
told her to get in touch with you.
Yes.
You have a great conversation with her, John. She'll be a great interview.
That'd be great. I appreciate you doing that, Gary. And LSU Press just received my information to send me a book, so they are going to invest in sending me a book. Sure. And I'm in touch with Cecily now to actually get it set up in about a month or two. As soon as the book gets here, we'll set it up.
It should be. It's in Mike Parrish's series and should be out very soon.
Yeah, when you originally told me about it, it wasn't even published yet. Like they hadn't printed it, and I said, "Why am I not receiving it?" And they said, "Oh, it's just coming off the printer next week." So it's literally hot off the press.
You'll probably see the book before I do. I've read it in page proofs, but I'm really looking forward to seeing the book.
Yeah, really looking forward to that. And Keith, I know you'll be picking up a copy as well. It sounds really amazing.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll send me one.
I do want to. I don't mean to interrupt you, Keith. I'm so sorry. Richard, this is a great eclectic conversation. Hey, that's what this is all about. When I first started Historians Off the Clock, there's no rules to this. It's just whatever we feel like discussing. And Gary, you're still grinding away on the book about your mother and her service.
Yes, I'm grinding away on that. That's my mother was in the only Navy USO show in the Pacific in World War II. She was in Eddie Bracken, who was a kind of A- level star in Hollywood in the mid 40s, especially in comedy. She was in Eddie Bracken's show, and they were in the Pacific for about 8 weeks, June, July, and August of 45. And she kept a diary while she was there. And then she used that diary in the 1950s to write a memoir. And I'm going to publish both the memoir and the diary. Together with the Navy photographers took thousands of pictures of them. So they're tremendous pictures of them doing all the things that you kind of see in movies with soldiers in hospitals, soldiers and Marines and sailors. And they entertained on aircraft carriers and cruisers and to huge audiences on Guam. And they were on Tinian when the Enola Gay took off, although they didn't know it. They found out a couple of days later. They were on Saipan and Peleliu, and it was quite an adventure for her. So that's it's a real change of pace.
Yeah, really looking forward to that. Keith,
me too. That sounds pretty cool.
Keith, you're doing.
John, sorry.
No, it's fine. You're doing a new video series, right? On YouTube. You're doing.
Yeah,
research?
I had years ago. I had a YouTube channel that had grown in popularity, and then I just thought it was stupid, so I deleted it, along with most of the rest of my social media, including Facebook and Twitter and everything else. I kept a couple of things that I'm still active on, but I decided that to relaunch the YouTube series, and what I'm doing is it is more or less the class in my honors U.S. history class that I teach. This is geared primarily for high school students, and also for high school teachers who want to get some ideas maybe. But it's geared toward not the conventional advanced placement U.S. history narrative, not the conventional stuff, not the conventional textbook stuff, though I address that. But really what I do is each episode, which is about 8 to 10 minutes long, I bring up one point to think critically about whether it's a document or whether it's a different way of looking at a history that is the more conventional telling of the history, anything like that, just to get people's wheels turning in an effort to to counter what we were talking about earlier in the show, to remind students that there are multiple perspectives and there's all kinds of different ways to view historical events, and we look at primary sources, especially in my classes. That's what we talk about more than anything else is the primary sources, and I often have my students break those down to try to understand the various points of view of the individuals who are writing the sources, what their biases might be, what their intended audience might be, what point they're trying to get across, what's the context in which they're writing, and all these things factor in. And I think as Gary mentioned, the sort of cartoonish version of history that we sometimes get, even as far as the university level, this is definitely something that I'm trying to counter with every ounce of my being. So this is what this YouTube series is really about. And I just started. I've only got the first couple of things up about the Spanish colonies in the 16th century, and so I'm adding them in daily, and I'm also doing a book review thing on there that I also just launched, which could be pretty interesting. Just doing a video version of my book reviews that I often put on my website in an abbreviated form, of course.
Keith, you're teaching students here in LA, and is your school on the west side? Where are you in LA?
No, yeah, I don't do the west side too much. I'm on Fairfax.
Oh, you're on
Fairfax.
Okay. But they're
in the Fairfax.
These are LA students. How do you? Mm-hmm. What is their reaction to the Civil War? Do they really engage with the Civil War? Does it ignite their imaginations to deal with the people and issues from the Civil War?
It does. They're really interested in what's even in addition to them being West Coast kids. They're also the majority of them are their parents or their grandparents are immigrants, and so these are kids that, with rare exception, have any connection to the Civil War at all. And so when they learn about it, this is. To me, if it's taught well, how could you not?
It takes an act of will to make the Civil War boring.
Yeah, it's such an incredibly interesting story with all of these compelling characters, and they get very excited about it because I like to break it down and tell the anecdotes, especially. They really like the stories behind it and various things. So they enjoy it, and even if they go into, it's one of my more advanced classes that I teach to juniors and seniors, and oftentimes they're not necessarily interested in the war at first. They're interested in the discipline because they want to learn how to write a research paper and those things, and that's one of the things that I teach. But once they get in, and we spend a good deal of time front loading it, going through the Constitution, going through debates about slavery, going through different definitions of government and what all that kind of thing, all that stuff means, and they get really caught up in the process, and then they begin to, many of them anyway, fall in love with the history of the Civil War, as I did when I was a kid, and so a lot of my kids wind up, they go off, if they're not studying the Civil War specifically, they're certainly interested in history because of it.
Right. Did you take Joan's class at UCLA?
I did. Mm-hmm.
as an undergrad.
I took that and the Gilded Ages as an undergrad.
When she first proposed teaching that Civil War class at UCLA, they said, well, we don't think there's a constituency here for that class. It doesn't meet our student body's demographics very well. And of course, Joan offered it, and it had 400 students in it at its. I mean, it was the biggest Civil War class in the country. And as she told them one time, there were a lot of Robert Lees in the class, not any of them related to the general. And yes, there are a lot of Asian kids in the class, and they loved the topic because it's such a fascinating topic. It just seems like there are assumptions about who will be interested in things that miss the point entirely. That if you have a good teacher and a good topic, anybody can be interested in it and really become engaged with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Comment from Amy Turcott. I wasn't going to try to offer a Civil War class, but some students are asking for one. I'm in Washington State, and this pleasantly surprised me. So there you go. West Coasters. There it is.
I grew up born in LA, but grew up on a farm in southern Colorado. No tie to the Civil War, no family tie, no Civil War site anywhere near, no nothing. And it absolutely captivated me. I mean, I really think just because of the importance of the issues at stake, the personalities, the writings, it's just really, it seems to me that there's almost no better way to get people to engage with the past in a serious way than to use the Civil War. I mean, there's so many ways to come at it, so many facets, and so much. To come back to Keith's primary documents point, the amount of testimony is just overwhelming. You can find testimony on everything from it, that to try to get people to pull them into it.
Well, let me tell you, I mean, talk about, high school kids, and these are, maybe first, second generation kids primarily. And just as just to confirm that they are excited about this stuff. I recently acquired a copy of the OR. And I have it in my classroom, right? All 128 volumes up on the wall. They look fantastic, right? And when I got them, the kids came in like during lunch when I was putting them up on the wall, and they just sort of surrounded the books, and they were in awe of them and pulling them off the shelves and reading all the little individual battle reports and personal correspondence and everything. They got very excited about it, and these, I wouldn't have expected them to do that, but they're interested, right? They're interested in something that's unfamiliar to them, that they didn't learn in middle school. They didn't teach them anything about it, except for maybe a day. They spend maybe a day on it, perhaps in middle school. But they're excited to read the testimony of 19th century historical actors, and to see them just pull random volumes off the shelf and just sort of pour over them. It, kind of warmed my heart. I took a picture of them all doing it, and I sent it to the guy that I bought them from.
Did you get Broadway's reprint of it? Which version of it did you get?
No, I got the other one. What's the other?
The gray one, National Historical Society.
It's black, and it's got gold lettering on the outside. Yeah, that's the one. I got it from Books of Valor. He's a solid guy, and has tons of stuff. I could go broke very easily, just sort of plucking things from his catalog.
When I downsized from the house in Charlottesville that you're familiar with, Keith, where I had 4 libraries, to a condo where I don't have 4 libraries, I had to get rid of about 4,500 books. But among the 1,500 I held on to was my reprint set of the OR, of course, which is just comforting to have it nearby.
It makes me feel good whenever I walk into my classroom and see it. I like just to take pictures in front of it. I mean, it makes me feel like, an important guy, because I got the wall of books is very reassuring to me whenever I show up to school.
At the opposite end of the students who were sort of really engaged by your set of the OR, I used to invite students over at the end of the semester, and one guy was going through them, and he flipped through one, he pulled another one, he flipped through it, and he said, "Do any of these volumes have pictures in them?"
I knew that's what was going to happen.
I said there was a separate atlas, but no, really not a lot of pictures. Not a lot of pictures.
Yeah. Brady didn't get to put any photos in that one there. Neil Orford, my good friend from Ontario, great public educator. U.S. Civil War is among the most engaging topics for Ontario students when I taught grade 11 American history at the university level. That's going back a decade. Yeah, it does it. Neil, thank you for being here.
Yep.
He's got the everybody feel pity for Neil. He's going to be traveling 15 days with me from Northumbria to Normandy for a tour, and I'm one of the tour historians on this group. So Neil's going to get the John Heckman experience of being on a tour. That should be fun.
That looks like a lot of fun, by the way.
It's going to be epic. 15 days starting up around York and heading over towards Whitby, and then Hadrian's Wall. I'm going to go into the issue of walls. If we're going to talk about the general idea of walls, why is this wall place of pilgrimage, but yet we think of other walls in different ways? And I'm not going to try to get theoretical, or anything, but it's going to be interesting. And then we're going to be on tour going over to the continent and ending. Well, we're going to go to Normandy, obviously, Juno Beach. And we're going to end in Paris. Hopefully there's a side trip to Versailles, though. I got to see Versailles. So that's my second overseas trip of this year. And June is my first one, and it's the first time I've been overseas. So it only took me 43 years, but I'm finally going to make it. So I'm looking forward to that.
Have a great time. I'm sorry that I missed the first episode of the new series on the 8th Air Force, the one that sort of finishes the Band of Brothers, the Pacific series. I know it started last night, and we didn't see it. I
need to watch that too.
Yeah. The book Miller's book is such a good book. Donald Miller's book that it's based on. He is a first-rate historian. And that his book on Vicksburg is good. This book on the 8th Air Force is really, really, Masters of the Air is really well done. Really well done.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked the Pacific series. I thought that was fantastic. I watched that numerous times. That's one of the. I liked it better than Band of Brothers. I thought the series on the Pacific was wonderful.
I initially liked Band of Brothers better, and then I watched the Pacific again, and now I just find the Pacific. It's just a treasure. I mean, it's kind of really, really is well done. And the two books it's based on are both one of them a classic, and the other one a very good one. But it is, it's very, and to come back to, I mean, I think about my mother when I watch that. I mean, and she entertained for those days, entertained for more than 700,000 servicemen and women when they were in that 10 weeks. And it's a lot of, and we're on islands, Peleliu and other that are featured in the Pacific. I think it's very well done. I'm sure the third one's just the same people who are doing it. I'm really looking forward to it.
I've heard a lot of people say the opposite. They like Band of Brothers more than the Pacific, and their argument was the Pacific was too chaotic. And I'm like, that's war. War. Who knew? War is chaotic.
Have the same narrative thread that Band of Brothers does. It's not the same guys going through, but it is. I mean, the Pacific War is such a sprawling, unbelievably complicated event. It really, really is.
Yeah. I don't know. Some people don't like those large stories like that. I guess it's going back to the point of wanting it quick and easy. And
it's bad they can't make a Civil War series like that, isn't it? There's nothing on the Civil War that even comes close to Band of Brothers or the Pacific. Nothing even close.
No. I think that would be a wonderful, wonderful idea to follow a unit or several units through would be very interesting.
I agree.
Who would you want to see as the unit, though? Would it be like the Iron Brigade, one of the Iron Brigade?
Regiment in the I picked the 6th Wisconsin or something like that. And but you could, I mean, and that's my Eastern bias showing. Maybe I should have picked a regiment. Pick one of those 11th or 12th Corps regiments that are in Virginia until 64, and then there was Sherman. You can get both. You can get a kind of 2-for-1 with that.
There you go. Yeah. Because I mean, nobody's picked up Sam Watkins. He seemingly was everywhere, according to him. So,
according to him.
Yeah, that's right. According to him. Let's underscore that.
Yes. It is. I mean, well, anyway, I won't make. I will make a sort of small pitch for something here. I mean, And this is not anything that has anything to do with me, except I wrote an introduction for a reprint of it. It's Alpheus Williams' letters from the cannon's mouth. So here's a guy who is one of those. He starts in the Eastern Theater, ends up with Sherman in the West. These letters are just unbelievable on many levels. Not only the way that they give insight into the cultures of command in the Army, the Potomac under McClellan, and then the culture under Sherman, but the impact of the war on the Confederate home front. He has a lot to say about enslaved people and passage from slavery to freedom in here. These are incredible letters. But a set of letters like this could be the kind of animating thing for this kind of a study or this kind of a program that we're talking about. But they've never done it, and I've never even heard of anybody thinking seriously about doing one. And I don't know whether people watched, how many episodes of Ken Burns were there? 9, 10, whatever there were. Would be shorter than that, but seems like it's a natural and nobody's ever done it.
Yeah, that's right. Keith, who would you pick for that series?
Oh, that'd be a tough one. I think I would like to, in the name of sectional reconciliation, of course, try to follow a unit from both the Union and the Confederate side of things. I mean, both Band of Brothers and the Pacific followed different units. Yeah. Or, well, the Band of Brothers followed the one unit, but the Pacific followed different units. And I think it might be interesting to see those differing perspectives. So I don't know. And I'm an Eastern theater guy, so I think the Iron Brigade would be cool to check out. One of the regiments in the Iron Brigade, and that could put them at Gettysburg. And of course, everybody's very excited about that, and they'd be able to see what they were up to there, and then follow a Virginia regiment, along the same path, and have them face off against each other from time to time, I suppose. And it could be a pretty interesting story. I don't know of anyone in particular that I would pick, although I do like your idea of the Iron Brigade. That would be fun.
Yeah, I mean, I pick one of those North Carolina brigades, or pick a regiment in one of those brigades that was everywhere early in the war. And then even in the Overland Campaign, and then ended up going to the Valley under I mean, there are units that would take you all over the place, and that would get you a nice slice of the war, and such good. But anyway, I don't know. I think it might be, and I'm being serious now, I think it might be problematical to try to do a Confederate unit there now. I think a lot of people would roll their eyes if you're talking about getting something like this funded. You have a better chance to get it funded if you didn't do that, or if you said you were going to do a couple of Union regiments, maybe do a white regiment and do a black regiment, something like that. I think would have a much better chance of getting funded than trying to do something that had
probably right.
Confederacy.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of too while we were discussing this. Is that it would be really interesting to take it from the point of view of, let's say, a free black man from Boston or from that area, and talk about the idea of freedom and joining up and all that. But that goes through that kind of lineage of that covers 62, 63, and then joining up and such. But yeah, something like that would be really,
I mean, in my view, by far the best Civil War movie is Glory, and Glory does a good job on almost all the big things with a black regiment. I mean, there's nothing equivalent on any white regiment to Glory. I mean, nothing, not even anything even close within shouting distance of Glory on any white regiment.
Yeah. I just showed that film to my Civil War students, and they quite liked it. I've shown them clips from other films, but we sat down and watched the whole thing. Yeah, and it was by request, by the way. And they also they're interested in watching Spielberg's Lincoln.
Sure.
To see what I think that'd be a good film for them to watch too. So again, going back, reflecting on this idea that students are interested in Civil War history. These are things that they've requested to do on their own time. By the way, I don't show them in class; I show them after school. Sure. And so and I think that movie holds up very well. Glory does. I think that film is now 30 years old. Is that about right?
30, somewhere in that neighborhood. 35 this year,
okay.
I think.
Came out in 89, so this is its 35th.
Okay, so yeah, wow, okay, it's older now. So, but it holds up well, I think.
It holds up very well because it has has really good actors. I mean, of course there are things wrong with Glory. It gets things wrong, but it gets the big things right, I think. And and the performances are so good in it that it really does. And I think the Antietam sequence in Glory is still the best combat sequence of anything Hollywood ever done. Nothing in Gettysburg is as good as the Antietam sequence in Glory. I think it's the best. But there's I mean, there have been so many bad Civil War movies, but that one does, I agree, that holds up very well.
My least favorite Civil War movie, since we're talking about it, is Gods and Generals.
Oh yeah,
by a Confederate mile. That is my least favorite one.
Confederate mile.
I did not. That one. I mean, I've sat through it.
I think that movie did inspire the book that has perhaps my favorite title of all the books on the Civil War, and that is Stonewall Jackson: The Black Man's Friend. Now there,
okay.
Wow.
I take it back.
My goodness.
Those scenes between Jackson and the cook are just priceless.
Yeah, I know.
And
they're tough to watch.
Yeah.
There's some cringeworthy stuff in that film, and that's for sure. I
Actually,
I won't subject my students to it.
Yeah, it's a fun movie to write. I mean, it's fun to write about it because you can be really sarcastic and on point.
About Fredericksburg, I show just to get them to give the students an idea of what the Union assault at Fredericksburg looked like. I show them that one scene, and this scene, I have to try not to laugh because it's an emotional scene. It's the scene where the Irish Brigade the Union Irish Brigade goes up against the Confederate, and they blaze away. Damn you! And they blaze away at each other and burst into tears. It's a lot to watch.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many parts. There's just so many parts of it, but it's 4 hours long, so
it is 4 hours. I've sat through that movie twice, and I'll never get those hours back. But
it's one of those things.
It's good material.
It's one of those things. You know how reaction videos are big right now. We just need a bunch of us historians reacting to that movie.
Now that would be a nice YouTube thing to watch.
See?
Civil War historians react in real time. Gods and Generals.
Just live stream it out. It's not against copyright if you're like adding to it. So reacting is adding. So
it's adding. Oh, definitely adding. Yes, that would be adding.
That could be our historians off the clock sometime. I mean,
that'd be pretty good. Kind of like Mystery Science Theater. Science Theater used to do with a campy old 1950s sci-fi movies.
Oh, I love that show.
Something like that would be good. Yeah, me too. I love that show a lot. But that's actually a pretty good idea. I like that.
It is a good idea.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to make that happen.
There are good little Civil War movies. I'm a huge fan of Pharaoh's Army. I think Pharaoh's Army is a really wonderful little movie that gets at complexities and has Patricia Clarkson and Chris Cooper and good actors and actresses in it. Chris Christopherson is in it toward the end of it. It's I think well done. Really tiny little movie that no one saw when it came out and no one knows about it, but it's well done.
Gary, you're getting ready to head east, aren't you?
I am getting ready to head east. I've been out west for 2 months, a little more than 2 months. So I'm going back to where weather occurs, and I'm kind of gearing up for it.
It rained. Gary, it rained today. Don't tell me that weather.
There was a lot. It is fun to be in Los Angeles and watch the local weather. They treat an inch of rain like Armageddon. I mean, it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch people melt down about even the sun. Or it's so cold I can hardly stand it. How cold is it? Well, it was only 62 today. Oh, that's right. And yet you survived. You're so strong. It's anyway. It's going to be very different in the east. Charlottesville had snow this year. Keith, it doesn't always get snow, but it's had snow this year, and it was down. I think it got down to 11 one night. That's pretty cold in Charlottesville.
Wow.
I do not miss the snow. I tell you, the last winter that I was in
No,
Virginia was
I,
that season, that year where there was like 8 feet of snow. That
yep.
all happened within 24 hours.
Oh.
That was it for
I
me.
every day I wake up here and walk out in Kenter Canyon and take a 5-mile walk, and it's 68 degrees and it's January and the sun's out. No, I don't miss it at all.
No, you don't want to come to the 1812 sites here right now.
No,
So
I don't.
you just July, would be good for you. But yeah, what are you doing out east, Gary? Why are you coming back to Richmond?
I'm usually busy I'm usually in LA in the winter and the depths of the summer. But I have teachers things that I do in the East, and I have several lectures I'm giving at different conferences, and running a Teachers Institute with Carrie Janey at UVA, and then going to one of the Gilder Lehrman's Teachers Institute at Gettysburg. And anyway, I just do that kind of stuff in the East. And it's usually March, April, May, and June are my busiest. I try to put a lot of stuff together in those months, and then a little bit in the fall. But so that's why I'm headed east. And
Keith, you're heading east.
And I miss my books, the ones that are left.
The ones that are there. Keith, you're heading back
ones
east.
Remaining. Yeah, east. I take my students on a Civil War field trip every year, and we've recently expanded. I used to focus entirely on Gettysburg, but I've recently reimagined that. Now we base ourselves out of Washington, D.C. And use that sort of as our central hub. And we go to a number of Civil War sites. Last year, we went to Antietam, Gettysburg, of course. We went to Harper's Ferry. We went to Richmond. And in Richmond, went to Hollywood Cemetery there in Richmond. They got a big helping of Lost Cause there. And we went out and visited. And this is my favorite story, really, from the trip last year. Is that sort of we decided, because we happened to be in the Virginia region on May 3rd. And so we decided to go out and visit the grave of Stonewall Jackson's arm. And nobody was there on the 160th anniversary of the burial of the limb. Whether it's there or not doesn't matter to me. It was that the grave is there. So we went to talk about that. And we met a couple of guys out there that were groundskeepers. They're mowing the grass, some old guys, and they were Westerners, but had married Virginia women and moved there and had they had a sort of Confederate orientation of their understanding of what the war was about. And my kids, they're Westerners, and they've come up with me. And so there's my orientation of how the war, and then those two things kind of conflicted. And what was beautiful about this story is that we had a lovely conversation with these folks and just sort of disagreed about some stuff, but still had a very productive conversation. The guys were super cool. And they got a taste of the local flavor, and it was a great trip. It's always a great trip. We got a special tour of the Capitol building this year through some connections. We got to go in and see the Senate in session, and got to go and see the old Senate chamber where Senator got his brains. Yeah, it's cool. I liked it. We got into the old Supreme Court chamber where Tawny read Dred Scott decision. We got to sit in there, and there's something when you're in these places. This is why I take my kids on these field trips. When you're in these places, it is such a completely different experience than speaking about it in the classroom or reading about it in books. When they can actually go to Devil's Den, for example, and touch the rocks that I've shown them pictures of, and show them 1863 images, and then they're standing there, and it doesn't look any different. And then we read stories about what happened to people. I give every one of my students a little small picture of a soldier, a common soldier, and with some biographical information on the back. Anything I can find out about the guy, whether he what if he's a farmer, do you like dogs, this kind of stuff, right? Just personal information about them. And then at the end of the day, we find out what happened to them. And it's always an experience when the students find out, maybe he was killed in action, maybe he was wounded in action, maybe he survived the war and went on to do some things. And it really humanizes the conflict. So this is my favorite thing to do, and I either do it in April or May, depending on when the holidays fall. And I also don't want to go there in the wintertime because we're Southern Californians and we can't handle the weather. So I always take them there in the springtime when it's nice, and it's a great trip. They really enjoy it.
No substitute for going. I mean, those places you can't do in any classroom what you can do in those places. They're just things you can do on the ground that you cannot do in a classroom. You guys, I have got to head out. This was delightful. I really appreciate the invitation, and would be happy to do it again sometime if you run out of other topics in a year or whenever. But anyway, it was big fun. Good to see you both.
Thank you for joining us, Gary. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Take care.
Take care now.
See you later.
Well, Keith, it's
Well,
just
all right
you
now, and then there were two. It's just us.
And then there were two. I'm gonna switch us out to this angle here, because it's kind of weird having us out of kilter there. But yeah, there is.
Although I like your graphic. Your graphic is pretty cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if it'll work this way. Kind of.
Yeah, there it is. You can still see it. That was
works.
pretty cool.
Thank you. Yeah, that was all 5 minutes worth of work. I can do one thing really well. I can do Canva. But yeah, I felt bad.
I'm still struggling with it.
I felt bad for your students the last time I was with you, and we had that downpour of rain, and it was cold. And I'm like, I could tell they are not used to that in that time of year.
You know, I just told them, it's like, look, we had the whole talk before we go. I go, the Mid-Atlantic, unpredictable weather this time of year. We may experience beautiful spring weather, and it may be a torrential downpour, and we're just going to have to deal because we're going out there, rain or shine. But they still talk about that. That particular group has long since graduated, but I keep in touch with them. And they still send me messages and things talking about that day when we were, like, you know, marching out to see that little plaque. That was the U.S. Army camp, the little plaque out there.
Camp.
And we marched through the muck, you know, up to our kneecaps, and then we went and had lunch, and then, you know, it was just, I mean, we were all shivering.
Yeah, it was bad.
That was a fun day. I warned them, and they were prepared. So
that was fun. Apparently, we have to do the reaction videos because someone in a Civil War discussion group is saying Gods and Generals is a documentary. So yeah.
Oh, well, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well,
I don't know what to think of that.
Definitely the reaction videos for sure.
Yeah. Terrence, welcome in from YouTube. I was at Lundy's Lane 2 weeks ago. It was a little cold. Oh, it was cold. It was cold, my friend. I hope you're doing well. Yeah, that's the next thing, Keith. I mean, Gary said he's wanting to join me on an 1812 tour up here. I think that's a little intimidating to think that I'd be taking Gary around to 1812 sites, but it could be a lot of fun.
That'd be cool. It would be fun. I would have joined you on your European tour. I tell you,
cool. Slots are still available.
We're doing. That would be rad. I mean,
yeah.
I proposed something like this at school. It's going to take, you know, some work. A World War II field trip, kind of modeled on my Civil War field trip, but you know, it's a little bit cost prohibitive, of course, and taking time away from school. It'd be a thing I wanted to start in London and work my way through through Normandy and the liberation of Paris, and that was sort of kind of how I envisioned it. You know, doing a thing with my colleague who teaches World War II history, and we were going to work on something together. But I think it would be just a little bit too complicated. I'll keep throwing it, you know, at the wall, and one day maybe it'll stick. That would be cool. The last time I was in Europe was in 22, and I went to Poland. And that was an experience. I mean, an experience that I'll never forget. We visited all of the various camps, Nazi death camps in Poland, and that was something, you know, I mean, talk about when you're in a place, it completely changes your perspective of the history as you understand it. And that to me is something that, you know, I would encourage anybody to do. It's difficult. You know, it's very difficult emotionally to deal with, you know, when you're standing in a place where hundreds of thousands of people, you know, met their demise. It's difficult emotionally, but man, I tell you, it's well worth it. So, you know, historical field trips are the way to go. You know, without question.
Yeah, the nice part about moving here and experiencing new things and being around people who you know, they're not Americans, they're Canadians, and it's nice because they remember that I'm the American in the crowd, and they're like, hey, we're going to Normandy. Can you lead us on a tour of the American sectors because you're the Yank? And I'm like, well, yeah, that's nice. So it comes in handy sometimes, when it's like, okay. So in June, I'm going to be doing that for Project 44. That team invited me over for 7 days or so, and we're going to be doing the beaches and landing zones, and then the drop zones as well. And they're going to Juneau on the 6th, and I don't know what I'm doing yet on the 6th because they're having a ceremony there. And last time they were there, they waited in line for like 3 hours and all this. And I'm like, that's not what I want to do on June 6th. So I think I'm going to find some cafe overlooking the beach and just drink coffee and enjoy a relaxing day. And then going back over in October for the Northumbria to Normandy tour. It's really going to be an eye-opening experience for me, but this could lead to future endeavors, helping others to do tours and be tour historian on a couple more things. So it's really interesting, seeing the progression of helping people at historical sites, and you've been through that as well. And I'm really looking forward to the conversations like I've had with your students, and I've had with others. This will be an older generation of people, but at the same time, they're still reading the same primary sources that your students are. So,
yep, yeah, no, it'll be fantastic. I'm looking forward to hearing how that goes for you. I'll be following you along on social media, kind of enviously following you along on social media on that one.
Yeah, this is going to be really interesting, especially since it's a long time coming. 20 years I've been wanting to get there, and finally I'm going to get to go. And it's just nice to be able to put it on socials so everyone can see it and give them access. And I'm not going to do some nicely edited video or anything like that, but I might do some live streaming right from the space, or photography, stuff like that. So it's better than not. There's also times where I'm just going to be like, I'm going to leave my phone in my pocket and just take it all in, and I think that's important for creators, that sometimes just put the phone down. And
sometimes I think that's important.
Yeah. Take
I mean, that's when I was in Poland, I did the day where I got to go off on my own and do my own thing, where the kids were doing, they had some obligations they had to take care of, and I got a day just to go hang out. And so I went into Old Town Krakow, and I just put my phone in my pocket, and I sat down one of those, like this cafe, and ordered some food and just sort of watched people. It was so rad, and it was just one of the great experiences of that trip. Sometimes I think it is important to put everything down and just experience the moment. I think we are so glued, and I'm guilty of this too. I mean, I spend a lot of time with social media and my phone, and like recording things and doing all that kind of stuff, because it's important as a creator to do that sort of thing. But from time to time, I think it's important for us to divorce our technological world and just embrace being in the moment and living and experiencing things with our eyes. And maybe more of us should do that sometimes. Sometimes I see my students, in the hallways, and and I say, man, come on, let's just go outside and throw a frisbee around or something. What are you guys doing?
Yeah,
but
I have seminar students who don't even have smartphones anymore. They've detached themselves from it, and they're going back to like the old flip phone style or whatever else, because they don't want to be connected to it in that way. And I guess that's just self-awareness, that they know that they don't trust it, or they think they might be addicted to it over time. They're afraid, and they just want to live and experience the moment, kind of like we did in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so they're doing that. And I've also noticed a lot of students are taking notes by hand now. They're not using laptops. So
I require my students to take notes by hand. I don't allow any devices in the classroom. They have they all bring out their notebooks, they take everything down. There's something about the active, the writing it down, I think, that helps them work through the material a little bit better.
I still take all my notes by hand. And then I transpose it onto a Word document, but I'm taking notes twice in my head, and it sticks. Before we wrap up, John, hello, John. Have either of you read John Atscheller's fiction series on the Civil War? I have not. I don't know.
I have not either.
I don't know that. I don't know that one, John. Thank you for being here. I'm sure the weather is fine in Florida tonight. Thank you for being here. Joe Ricci out there in the Western Theater, Franklin. We talk about this a lot at work. There's a power of place. I still didn't get to Franklin. Upset that I didn't get to Franklin. Joe's been wanting me to get there and do that. I'll be on his podcast next week, so that should be fun. Keith, are you gonna fire up the podcast again, or are you going to just stick with video?
I keep threatening to do that. I was talking to my wife about that just tonight, by the way. I would love to fire up the podcast again. I might reimagine it. Before the Rogue Historian podcast was a pretty successful podcast, and it was an interview-based podcast, which is great. I enjoyed doing the interviews. There's a lot of work that goes into that. And people listen to podcasts, I don't think they realize how much research and work and it goes into an hour, 90-minute interview. It's really something. But I kind of want to reimagine the podcast, and if I can make time to do it this summer, is to put together a series, maybe six or so episodes telling a story, and bringing experts in to comment on that story as I tell the story, and sort of release it all at once. That's sort of what I'm imagining. I would really love to do, for example, the story of John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, which I think is such a fascinating story. One of the places I take my students, they love going there because they've sort of restored the town to 1850s kind of vibe, but you can still buy things in the gift shops, and you can still get refreshments and various things. There's a beautiful hike there if you want. So there's still the 21st century, but it looks, the way it looks, they enjoy it and they can run around and have a good time. But I would love to tell that story, the events leading up to the raid itself, and then the aftermath of the raid. And I think that would be a really cool podcast series, and bring in experts on that. So I don't know. I'm kicking around some ideas. I would love to reintroduce it. It's just so incredibly time consuming, and I've got so many other projects in the works, including working on a new book about Union veterans at monument dedication. This is my field, but I'm taking a new spin on it, looking at how they embrace the 19th century ideas of American exceptionalism and how those come through in their monument dedications. So I'm interested in that. I've got a lot of research in the bank on that, and so I need to start putting that together. And I've got a piece that I wrote, a piece that I finished about a year ago that's going to be published in Gettysburg Magazine this summer. So there's a little warning shot there that sort of gives you the general idea of what I'm going for. Then I'm going to break it down in more detail in the book. And again, this is one of those things, as a high school teacher, I teach 7 classes, and so it occupies a lot of my time. And so it's difficult sometimes to break myself out of that mode, and then put myself back in the academic mode and write academic history. And so, I enjoy just, writing little blurbs on my website and doing little videos on social media. I think that's a lot of fun, and it engages more people. I mean, let's be honest. If I write an academic book, I don't know if I'm going to reach nearly as many people as I would reach on my Instagram account in a typical day. So, but I miss it. So, I'll continue to work on that. And one of these days, I suspect I'll publish another thing.
Yeah, that's why on my Buy Me a Coffee site for my members, I decided I wasn't going to do writing. I was just going to do audio, because it's less time consuming for me. I can kick it out, it's done, and it's a time thing, and it's just easier to create an update via audio. It's done in 10 minutes. It's out. It's on the way. Because I write enough for the PhD studies.
How's that going, by the way? I've been meaning to ask you, how are your studies going?
I can honestly say I've never been more comfortable, which is weird.
Oh, great.
I'm not stressed. I'm happy, and I'm learning a lot of new ways of looking at things in how should I say this? I've really been interested. I went in with this idea of my dissertation, and I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to stick with it. And that lasted all of a term. And it's like, wow, okay, I never considered it from this angle. I want to change things up. So I got involved in a research assistantship, and which I'm still working on through April. And I'm currently writing about 8,000 words, which may not sound a lot to a lot of people, but when you're diving into this stuff, it can be a grind. It's a journal article, 8,000 word journal article on the weaponized perspective or the weaponized gaze of smart munitions and drone warfare.
Cool.
And how that impacts our historical memory. So I start with the Gulf War and all of us watching the cruise missile videos on the news at night, and how that made it appear like a clean war. And so it's going back to actually, and I talked to my advisor about this. It goes back to my old days of looking at the Civil War images in Fresnito's book and talking about our perspective of detritus on the battlefield and all this other stuff. And now looking at it from modern age drone warfare in Ukraine is what I'm looking at. And who knew I was going to go down that route, but it allowed me to see footage from different eras and even photographs from different eras in a new way, and the bias of the camera and stuff like that. So I think my dissertation's heading more towards that, but it sticks with that historical memory perspective, and it's something that I'm really, really intrigued by and interested in, and I'm reading all kinds of stuff on it, and I got to kick out this paper and this journal article. I got to have it done in the next month. So that's my baby right now, on top of the classwork and teaching 2 seminars. Yeah, but it's busy work, and it's work that I enjoy. So I've really been enjoying the process, and really been surrounded by some great people who have wanted to collaborate and who don't make everything a competition. And that's huge for me. So, because I've always been a person who loves to collaborate, as you know, and
sure,
it's good to be around that perspective. Yeah, Richard, yes, from Fres to the Gulf. Yes, basically. That'll be, maybe I should name my article that.
That's not the worst idea. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Touch all
both of my Fresnillo books are out on loan right now. I lent them to a student who was doing a thing on photography. So, I think those books are great. I love those the Fresnillo books. I remember getting those ages ago, and I pore over those, all day long. Super interesting things.
Yeah, and the idea behind the whole weaponized perspective or the photography or whatever allows me to not stick with just one era. I can kind of talk about a thing that's timeless, and historical memory is definitely timeless, but it's really nice to go from tin types to HD cameras on drones. So interesting perspective. No pun intended. But hey, I'll let you go, Keith, because I know you have work to do. And man, I really appreciate you doing this with me. We need to do more of these and bring some other people.
Yeah, for sure. This was fun.
Yeah.
Bring all kinds of folks on. We could it'd be fun. It'd be lots of fun. I enjoy this a lot.
Yeah, we need to collaborate on this, and it's nice to have someone else come on with me to help lead the conversation. And I couldn't think of anybody better than you. We're on the same level. So I really appreciate
I think we are, yes. I appreciate that, John. Thank you. And I tell you, man, it's cool to talk to somebody who kind of gets it with this stuff, and understands that even as academic historians, our job really is to speak to people and not be confined within, the university system. So I'm glad you get it. And so I'll talk to you about this stuff whenever.
Yeah, we'll get it set up. Thank you to everyone who has joined us across all 4 channels.
Wow.
Keith's YouTube, my YouTube. Thank you, everybody on YouTube, so much for the conversation tonight. Facebook, thank you, everybody there. And if anyone came on board in LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn, which is open to the public, thank you so much for being on there. Thank you, Lucy, for being here. Really appreciate you. Have a great night, Baron. Thank you so much. David, have a great night, my friend. Take care, everyone. Be safe. Keep reading. We want you to have a library like Keith's when you're done. I'm stuck with Funko Pops right now. So
do you have a cool old vintage guitar in your library though? Because
I don't.
It doesn't stay in tune, but it is kind of a cool
instrument. That is nice.
1951 Gibson, which I've had this guitar since the 80s. And so I've had it for a really long time, but I love strumming on that thing.
You know, the guitar I wish I could own one that looked like it is, and this is very niche for some people. The country singer Gary Allen, back in the day, in the 90s, maybe 2000, he had the song Smoke Rings in the Dark. And that guitar is like a beautiful, it looks like that one a lot, but it's a cream colored guitar. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. And it had that nice low sound to it that was really just drew you in. Yeah, I need to do something, because I have this whole wall back here, and I've been thinking about what am I going to put up there. But I'm a drummer, so, or I was. I probably can't do it now. So sticks just don't work up there.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, it's not. It doesn't have the same dramatic effect.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, Baron, this is why I'm not as cool as Keith. He's got the guitar in there.
Yeah.
You know? I just have a Colonel Sanders Funko Pop back there, and post.
I like the Colonel Sanders.
Yeah, I got Colonel Sanders, Mr. Rogers, Smokey the Bear. We got the good stuff. So
there you go.
Again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Historians Off the Clock is always a hell of a lot of fun, and we're going to do this again. So everybody, take care of yourself. Be well.
See you guys.